today's learning working session. To build our capacity on Parliament level of committee. The facilitator for today's session is someone whose organization has been working with Parliament for the she will be able to share some experiences with us that her organization has been doing over the years.
Hi.
It's important to note that this is going to be a session that will run just about an hour. It's important to note that this is a session that is going to run an hour. This hour will have you also ask questions. So if you have any questions, the questions in the chat box, and we'll do well to read them, and the facilitator will answer them if you are on Zoom. Additionally, for those of you who want to hear the Francophone translation or interpretation, and to select French for this session. So without much ado, let me now welcome Ms. Harley Liu, who is a communications officer at Parliamentary Monitoring Group based in South. Harley Liu will be doing the presentation for today. So Harley, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. All right, may I begin?
Harley, we want to be sure that we hear you. If you can hear me, be reminded that interpretation we have to be slow, patient, so that interpreter can be able to follow. We'll appreciate that.
No, I just sent a message. Okay. Okay. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Drew Haller. I'm the Communications Officer for the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. I will be representing everyone today. We are currently situated in Cape Town, South Africa. We work very closely with Parliament, and we are very focused on accountability and transparency. So hopefully we can offer you some help today, and we can show you effective ways that CSOs can work with and monitor parliamentary committees. So, what are parliamentary monitoring organizations? Parliamentary monitoring organizations essentially seek to provide the public with access to information about Parliament and its functioning, public policy, and legislation. PMG aims to make Parliament and MPs more accountable to citizens and to encourage citizens to engage more actively, not only at election time, but also in the legislation and oversight process. While Parliament oversees the work of government and the executive, we must also ask who is overseeing the overseers. This is where the role of PMOs are very important. Regular access to information results, albeit passively, in the building of a culture of involvement that encourages accountability as a norm in government entities and institutions. This implies that Parliament should not operate in isolation of the people. Where transparency and openness is not the norm, PMOs can then be seen as important conduits of information and access for others. PMOs help other institutions and bodies to monitor and intervene in issues of public concern by holding both the executive and Parliament accountable. How do parliamentary monitoring organizations function? PMOs vary in their approaches to parliamentary monitoring. Some take a neutral stance, while others take a more adversarial stance. PMOs can choose whether they monitor the institution or its components. Such as party groups or committees, members of Parliament, or other facets of Parliament. All PMOs are, however, seeking to enhance parliamentary engagement in one form or another and to improve transparency. PMGs sets its initial goals and focus in the context of the onset of democracy in South Africa and the needs that arose from this transition. Our work is determined by our capacity, both in terms of funding and our staff availability and expertise. From the outset, the PMG board took the view that it should not engage in analysis, but rather leave that to the various other advocacy organizations already in existence, many of whom employed full-time experts in their chosen field. PMG has always been cognizant of the sensitivities that Parliament has towards our work. We remain convinced that PMG would not have been able to advance its current position or have the degree of cooperation that it currently enjoys from individual members of Parliament had it sought to interpret or comment upon the performance of parliamentary committees in the past. In more recent years, PMG has extended its services to a degree with the aim of strengthening the legislature. PMG is now moving to isolate some trends and offer basic analyses of the performance of salient functions of the institution. We engage constructively with the legislature and its different structures. I think we need to change the slide. So PMG replicates much of what Parliament is supposed to do because the legislature simply does not do so. PMG exists to promote transparency and openness. We aim to keep the public and the civil society informed and facilitate access to information in this way. Our monitoring of Parliament is thus very different to a jurisdiction where Parliament does indeed provide accurate, reliable, and up-to-date information on its work and activities. In such case, the PMO can take more of an evaluative approach and actively assess or monitor the outcomes and inputs of the legislature's work. Okay, I'm seeing that the slides aren't being changed. I'm not sure if I should maybe just pause for now while we sort that out so that everyone can follow. Okay, I'm just going to continue for now. So now we're going to ask, how are civil society organizations involved in the legislature? Civil society organizations are a very important conduit in informing and educating the public, ensuring that government provides adequate services and adopts evidence-based policies and connecting members of parliament with their grassroots constituents. It is important to take into consideration the full range of civil society groups. There are elite think tank organizations, policy advocacy, non-governmental organizations, as well as other non-traditional civil society groups. In the same vein, there is a strong need to recognize the value of the different types of knowledge that these respective groups are able to bring to the policy negotiating table. There is quantitative research, qualitative analyses, and then participatory CSOs. Parliament and MPs are still nervous about civic scrutiny, and a lot more work is needed to educate institutions, MPs, and the public on the benefits of engagement. The nature of parliamentary scrutiny means that PMOs are often perceived as simply waiting to criticize or highlight any imperfections of political leaders. Any PMO must expect that it will take some time to forge credible and effective working relationships with Parliament's presiding officers, MPs, and staff members. CSOs must be aware that bias or poor methodologies by PMOs may overshadow their positive contributions. Some PMOs, such as the Hansard Society in the United Kingdom, have managed to enter into a memorandum of understanding with their parliament. Others, such as National Democratic Institute, have been able to agree with their parliaments that they have a niche role that augments parliamentary work while still determining their own policies and remaining completely independent. Some democracies have been prepared to show a greater commitment to the process of accountability, while others haven't. In many countries, parliaments and MPs are still very nervous about the concept of civic scrutiny and are thus even more unlikely to be readily accepting of rigorous civic oversight. Perhaps the most important defense open to PMOs is that their information must be thoroughly credible. CSOs should choose to publicize only the information that is verifiable. In the words of Iftika Zaman Transparency International Bangladesh, we need to provide information that is impeccable and defendable. Whatever we say and do, we must have the information to back it up. Whether PMOs advocate for improved transparency or parliamentary information, they should ensure that their own organizations maintain high standards of transparency. Some have suggested that this means that CSOs should adhere to the same rules as MPs in relation to the disclosure of funding and assets. Another way in which poor perceptions may be addressed is through the education of MPs, and indeed also the public, on the benefits of monitoring to society as a whole. Whilst it cannot be expected that the mere fact of public support will necessarily protect PMOs from MP or institutional skepticism, the importance of public opinion should not be underestimated. For example, particularly where PMOs engage with citizens directly, it is beneficial to provide interactive sites. This creates a better match between public concerns and Parliament. Good performance is another positive factor that will influence popular support for civil society organizations. In South Africa, there is a broad recognition from the majority of committee chairpersons, governmental departments, civil society members, members of Parliament, and committee secretaries that the committee section of Parliament does not currently produce minutes in the same degree of detail as the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. Many committee chairpersons respect and maintain a good working relationship with PMG, offering a cordial and welcoming atmosphere in their committees. A PMO faced with negative perceptions, on the other hand, must ensure that it adopts sound methodology for whatever form of monitoring it conducts, especially where the organization might do quantitative assessments. There should also be recognition of the fact that whatever is accessible may not present the full picture. So there is a need to continuously develop tools that can better answer these challenges. How do civil society organizations and parliamentary organizations work with Parliament? What must be made clear is that establishing relationships and working with committees is most effective where there is a constituency. As the parliamentary monitoring organization, make your intentions known so that it's clear to the committee that you will be attending committee meetings regularly. In relation to the above, we can also say that it's important to be proactive and write to the committee to ask for a face-to-face meeting if you have a particular campaign that you think is important to bring to the attention of the relevant committee. If a meeting is not possible due to tight schedules, then request permission to distribute the campaign material. It is usually better to intervene as early as possible in the process of developing policy and laws. Stakeholder engagement is also vital, as there is strength in numbers. PMOs can lend themselves more credence if they are endorsed by other civil society organizations or related advocacy groups. CSOs can play an important role in providing individual legislatures and legislative committees with much needed expertise to inform parliamentary debates and decisions. They can use official channels such as submissions or public hearings, as well as unofficial channels such as social media. CSOs are very good for strengthening community and grassroots engagement with parliamentary committees. Committees can use CSOs to pass on useful information to their networks and alert communities to events of particular importance to them. Civil society organizations can play a really key role in bridging the gap between legislators and citizens by organizing campaigns, petitions, discussions, and more. Civil society organizations can also help to explore innovative ways of deliberating or gathering information to solve a particular problem. They can also help to enhance parliamentary oversight through the provision of data and tracking tools. They can use this information to support recommendations for the improvement in the legislature's operational machinery. CSOs also provide capacity building and training to lawmakers and committees. Digital technologies also offer plenty of opportunities to create more open, accountable, and engaged parliaments. Yet many parliaments do not yet have enough experience within the digital sector or with social media engagement. But CSOs can build tools for monitoring and facilitating interaction between MPs and citizens. CSOs can educate the public on the budget and audit and the importance of audits. They can also track the executive's responses to audits and measure the delivery levels of government initiatives. CSOs overall assist the public with requests for information by phone or email on a wide variety of queries relating to governance, human rights, legislation, or the work of parliamentary committees. Communication is a significant part of PMO's work, even though it doesn't always seem apparent. How can PMOs effectively monitor committees' constitutional mandates? PMOs are responsible for independently monitoring and assessing the performance of selected committees' constitutional mandates. This is an important way of fostering openness and accessibility while holding the executive to account and encouraging them to be responsive to the public. It is very important for PMOs to develop a scorecard to measure their effectiveness. For example, the Dalla Omar Institute is always a useful source which can be used to benefit the PMOs, as the monitoring methodology is clearly laid out so that there is no doubt about the veracity of information or data used. Over the past decade, More and more governments have adopted laws and practices that constrain civic space. Civic space is the set of conditions that allow civil society and individuals to organize, participate, and communicate freely and equally. Parliaments play a critical role in shaping civic space. They can do this by creating an environment that allows civil society to make its voice heard. They can also make sure civil society is able to defend civic space. Citizens have the right to provide input into the work of parliaments, and there are a number of ways that CSOs can engage, educate, and mobilize parliaments and parliamentarians in relation to the 2030 accountability agenda, including the following actions. CSOs can publish and disseminate information on parliamentary activity, track legislation, monitor constituency activities, monitor MP expenses and party funding. They can also offer analysis and research. Where PMOs choose to and have the capacity to include analysis of the information that they have collected, this takes the monitoring services to a completely different level. Parliamentary monitoring is a continuously evolving field, and parliamentary monitoring organizations must keep track of the latest developments, especially the use of civic technology tools, especially given the online proceedings of parliamentary activity owing to COVID-19 and the breakdown of physical barriers. Some advice for PMOs to consider. We believe it is very important that parliamentary monitoring organizations make their intentions clear and that they seek to build relationships with the legislatures. This builds a culture of cooperation and ensures that the strengthening and improved performance of the legislature in advancing democracy is clearly mandated and understood from both the side of the PMO as well as the side of the legislature. PMOs should really aim to build strong relationships with those in leadership roles at the very top of the legislature. There are many examples of good governance pledges that can be used to frame your cooperation. By its nature, Parliament is a political body. As a result, it is impacted by the dominance of the government, internal party dynamics, and the electoral system. Parliamentary effectiveness depends on the attitude and commitment of members of Parliament. So establishing relationships with the political leadership represented in the legislature would also be extremely beneficial. Communication. The value of communication is directly linked to its perceptions. PMOs need PMOs need to consistently ask themselves if they are reaching their target audience, and they need to reconsider their targets regularly. Despite the fact that there may be resistance, PMOs do need to keep up with communication with the institution of Parliament and also communicate highly effectively with individual members of Parliament. Self-assessment. The Parliamentary Monitoring Group and all other parliamentary monitoring organizations must continually assess the value of their services. PMG is confident that its operation is delivering services in many different ways. It has assessed its delivery in both quantitative and qualitative ways. It has carried out formal surveys and assessments and will, for instance, compare website statistics, the usage by particular organizations, and the number of new subscriptions each month. Combining monitoring activities with parliamentary support is also very important. Many PMOs have bolstered their credibility with members of Parliament by simply providing support for parliamentary development in conjunction with their monitoring and evaluation activities. Whilst the act of monitoring is valuable, it remains of limited impact if it merely reproduces information and does not in some way meet the needs of citizens, not only to access, but also to understand and work with that information. So as you can see, there are a variety of ways for PMOs and CSOs to engage effectively, but a lot of it is to do with self-assessment, communication, and building up a strong network. Thank you so much for listening, and that's all from my side for now.
Okay, thank you so very much, Ala, for your presentation. I noticed that for those of you who are within the Francophone zone, at some point you had challenges in hearing the direct interpretation. Our apologies for that, but I think all of us had a great presentation. Those of you who have asked the questions on whether the presentations will be shared, yes, both the English and the French presentations will be shared with you once you have registered, so that you can be able to have access to what has been presented so far. So at the moment, if you have any questions that you have for our facilitator, you can put the questions in the chat box so that we would address them to you. Those of you who are sending messages about the need for the presentations to be shared with you, yes, we will do well to share the presentation both in English and French with you. Thank you so very, very much for your interest in that. Now, you may be over to you again. One of the issues that you raised, and for your information, please note that those who are joining in online, apart from the team that's in the room here in Niamey, in Niger, there are colleagues who have joined from Gambia, colleagues who have joined from Burkina Faso, there is a colleague joining from Nepal, there are those who joined from Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and all of these colleagues have actually joined to be able to listen to the presentation on how better they can work with their respective national assemblies or parliaments through the committee system. One question that we have for you, so again, let me reinforce that for those Anglophones who are asking the questions, whether you get the English slides, yes, you get the English slides, they will be shared with you via email as appropriate. Once you have registered, your email address is captured in the system and they will be shared with you. So do not worry at all for that particular one. So Hella, let's maybe, if you can emphasize 2 or 3 specific challenges that you have discovered from your many years of work as an organization in the area of civil society working with parliamentary committees. 2 or 3 challenges that you have discovered and some of the ways that you have overcome these challenges so that our participants who have joined in from various countries can also learn. Of course, we are minded about the fact that they have to situate this in their national context. Over to you.
To get into company.
One thing I know that my colleagues and I have
If you're speaking, we can't hear you because you're muted. So if you can unmute, if you had a question, right, you can unmute so that you can address the question.
Hi. One thing I know that my colleagues and I have discussed is one of the difficulties for working in the sector is the fact that we do primarily depend on funding. So as I said earlier, obviously our roles and responsibilities and the extent of our work completely depends on our capacity. So that refers to our staff capacity. We work with quite a small team, and it also depends on our funding. We're funded by a variety of institutions and donors. But I would also definitely like to hand over to my senior, Monique, as well as Rashad. They can also answer these questions if you are able to make them a panelist.
Okay, so I think that Rashad will take note of those questions. We will upgrade him onto a panelist status so that he has answers to give on that. But in the meantime, we can move on to other questions while we look forward to upgrading Rashad address those other questions. There is a question in the chat box for you. How should we manage the distrust and sensitivity of parliamentarians, especially at the beginning of our approach to the institution? So when parliament mistrust civil society organizations and so we don't want to engage, how do they deal with that? And this is coming from Ms. Sylvie Seguba, who has joined us from Helen, did you hear my last question?
Hi, yes, yes. I think that's a question I'd prefer to hand over to Rashad and Monique, if that's possible. Maybe we can wait for them.
Okay. So maybe let me also attempt a few comments on that particular subject matter. Obviously, one of the things that has been noted across many civil society organizations working with Parliament is that there is obviously the mistrust at the very beginning. But just like it was said in our workshop from last Friday, this mistrust is one that can be dealt with when civil society organizations continuously prove their credibility through the quality of their work. So at the beginning, these parliamentarians would trust you. Yes, they would have, there is a consideration of whether civil society is not just wearing the cloak of civil society, but these are politicians wearing the cloak of civil society. And so the mistrust is there. But when you continuously produce quality work, that seems to show that you do not produce those outcomes on the basis of partisan considerations, but in the name of wanting to administer on public good, then gradually that becomes an issue that gets dealt with. So, basically, to answer your question, these are not things that get eroded in a day. It takes time, but of course, these are matters that fortunately can be dealt with based on the quality of work that we get to produce. Ali Mama also asked a question. Ali asked a question in French. He says,
my question is to know how the SEOs can work in the context of exceptional power, like after coup d'etat. Because as it's the case here in certain countries in Africa, in West Africa, like Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso.
So Ali Mama's question is on how civil society can work with their National Assembly after a coup d'etat situation. This is a very tricky question because obviously after a coup d'etat, the parliament gets dissolved, and so you definitely will not have a parliament to work with in your country. But of course, it doesn't mean that civic space ends. My advice would always be that you continue to monitor the local country context, continue to engage as the opportunity would allow, but we always leave you alive and active to be able to continue with the civic space work. So you don't put yourself in situations that would risk you and your staffers in the course of your work. But of course, by all means, let's continue to engage, because the ideal situation or the preferred situation is that countries will move towards democracy and not stay in the context of military overthrows. So and here I will do, just for the purposes of Ali Mama and those also who have joined Francophone right now.
Pour Ali Mama et d'autres qui nous rejoignent sur les pays francophones.
Ali was asking if civil society organizations, how do they get to operate in the context of...
Ali demande comment les organisations de la société pouvaient travailler dans un contexte de régime exceptionnel après un coup d'État.
Ali cited the examples of Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso.
Il a cité l'exemple de la Guinée, le Mali et le Burkina Faso.
And my response is that when the country is undergoing a military overthrow of the government, obviously there will be no more parliament.
Ma réponse est que au moment où, après un coup d'État, dans un pays, le Parlement est la première institution à être dissoute, donc il n'y aura pas la réalité des électeurs.
But there will still be a civic space to operate in, because civil society must still engage to get the country back.
Mais il devrait toujours y avoir un interlocuteur avec lequel travailler, parce que avec lequel la société civile va s'engager pour les différentes discussions.
And so we still have to do our work, we still have to be bold, but we also have to remember always that we have to work within safe confines so that we don't risk our lives.
Nous allons toujours continuer à faire notre travail tout en gardant à l'esprit que nous devrons aller de façon à aussi garantir notre propre sécurité, parce qu'on est dans un contexte de régime d'exception.
So yes, it's a difficult one when your country goes into a coup d'etat situation.
Oui, c'est vrai, c'est très difficile quand votre pays se retrouve dans une situation de coup d'État.
The concept of working with parliament will not apply.
Le contexte de travailler avec le Parlement ne va pas tenir.
But civil society still has a role.
Mais la société civile doit toujours avoir un rôle à jouer.
And maybe in the future we have to explore how civil society can work actively in a coup d'etat.
Peut-être que dans le futur, nous allons essayer de chercher à savoir, de trouver la solution, savoir comment est-ce que la société civile va travailler dans dans un contexte de coup d'État.
So if there are any other questions, we would like to take them now because we are not doing too well on time. In the next couple of minutes, we should be ending this online session.
Donc, s'il y a d'autres questions, nous sommes prêts à les avoir rapidement parce que nous manquons de temps. Nous allons devoir arrêter cette discussion en ligne dans 2 minutes.
All those who have actually asked their questions in the chat box, these questions have already been addressed, and we thank you for asking them.
Donc, tous ceux qui ont posé leurs questions, vous rassure que vos questions ont été portées. On a posé vos questions.
All right, so it's been half past the hour.
Maintenant, ça fait 1h30.
I think this is the point where we will draw the curtains on this online session.
Maintenant, nous sommes arrivés au moment où nous allons couper cette la communication en ligne.
And we want to thank greatly Haladriu from Parliamentary Monitoring South Africa.
Nous allons vraiment remercier M. Haladriu, vraiment sud-africain.
Who stood in for Rashad Ali.
La même chose pour Rashad Ali,
who is the executive director of
qui est le directeur exécutif
Parliamentary Monitoring Group
du groupe parlementaire d'Afrique du Sud.
So from wherever it is that you joined us this afternoon,
quel que soit de l'endroit duquel vous nous joignez ce soir,
whether it is from Nigeria,
que ce
Ghana,
soit du Nigeria ou du Ghana,
Burkina Faso,
du Burkina Faso, de la Côte d'Ivoire,
Gambia,
de la Gambie,
and for those of you who are here in the room in
et
Niger,
pour ceux qui sont ici dans la salle au Niger,
we thank you for joining us.
nous vous remercions de vous avoir joints à nous.
We will share the presentation both English and French.
Nous allons partager la présentation en français et en anglais
Who have registered,
qui a été enregistrée.
and the video recording for this session will also be available online.
Et aussi, l'enregistrement vidéo va être disponible en ligne.
So that those of you who missed certain parts can also go back.
Comme ça, ceux qui ont raté certaines parties peuvent revenir là-dessus pour mieux comprendre.
On that note, we thank you very, very much.
Sur ce, nous vous remercions très bien.
Have a very good day wherever it is that you join us from. Bye bye.
Et passez une très bonne soirée partout où vous nous voyez.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Au revoir.